Well, Chris, just give me a thumbs up when you're ready. Hello, everybody. I'm Katie Blunt, Director of the Department of Archives and History. Welcome to this week's History's Lunch Program, which is sponsored by the John and Lucy Shackelford Charitable Fund of the Community Foundation for Mississippi. We are in our home, the Craig H. Nielsen Auditorium in the two Mississippi Museums. And if you've not already done so, please silence your phones. I'm delighted today to introduce our friends and colleagues and downtown neighbors, Betsy Bradley and Ryan Dennis of the Mississippi Museum of Art. A couple of years ago, Betsy approached me with an idea. She was looking to develop an exhibit featuring artists descended from families who left the Deep South during the Great Migration. This exhibit would demonstrate the cultural cost to this region of the massive exodus and explore its impact on families, on the artists themselves, and on their creative expressions. She wondered if MDAH would like to be a partner in the Great Migration Initiative. I immediately agreed. It was a brilliant idea, characteristic of Betsy, and it connected very closely with our work here at MDAH. For many years, our archivists and librarians have worked with descendants of Great Migration families who come back in the summer for family reunions and to research their genealogy in our archives and library. This partnership would give us a chance to celebrate their stories, to connect with more such families outside Mississippi, and to explore one of the most interesting and transformative periods in American history. We have a number of public programs planned this year connected to our Great Migration Initiative, as well as a Smithsonian traveling exhibit, the Negro Motorist Green Book, opening July 2nd. You'll hear much more about our exhibits and programs, but today we have the opportunity to hear from Betsy Bradley and Chief Curator Ryan Dennis about the major exhibit, A Movement in Every Direction, Legacies of the Great Migration, opening next week at the Mississippi Museum of Art. Betsy Bradley has led the museum since 2001, overseeing significant growth of the institution, including the move to a renovated facility, which you've all been to, and the establishment of the creation of the Art Garden. Bradley was elected to membership of the Association of Art Museum Directors in 2012 and has served on the boards of Americans for the Arts, the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies, and the Southern Arts Federation. Ryan N. Dennis is Chief Curator and Artistic Director of the Center for Art and Public Exchange at the Mississippi Museum of Art. Her recent projects include Leonardo Drew, City in the Grass, and Betty Saar, Call and Response. Dennis has published widely and has been a visiting lecturer and critic at a number of art schools and institutions. The Mississippi Museum of Art is one of our closest partners, and we at MDAH are great admirers of their work. Please welcome Betsy Bradley and Ryan Dennis. And I think we'll have Betsy first.
That's quite a jump right there. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with all of you, such a loyal audience of intellectually curious people that we don't get to talk to all that often. So I'm thrilled to see so many friends here, and hello to those of you who are tuning in online. It feels right to kind of jumpstart our opening of the Great Migration exhibition here, because archives and history in these two museums are certainly our most important local partner in this effort. Katie is right that when I came to her with this idea, she just said yes. I didn't even finish talking about it. But that's the way they do things here. They're very generous community partners and eager to multiply their own resources and audiences by others, and so we're really grateful for that. Katie, for your leadership in doing that, and the way her team has responded as well. For those of you who don't know anything about the museum, because I'm going to try to be very brief because you're really here to hear about the exhibition and about Ryan and from Ryan, I just want to give you a little context. For those of you who don't know the museum, we have been around as an institution since the Art Study Club was founded in 1903, and then the Mississippi Art Association in 1911, which was an all-volunteer association operating out of what is now the Municipal Art Gallery on State Street until 1978, when there was a citizen-led campaign to put arts facilities in downtown Jackson and attract professional staff to create a professional museum. We have, this says 5,800 objects in our permanent collection. We're happy that that number changes pretty frequently. And we are thrilled to be in downtown Jackson in relationship to Thalia Mara Hall, the Arts Center, our former home, the Convention Center, and the Art Garden, which definitely sees a lot of activity. In 2019, I think it was, we adopted a new mission statement because we felt that our old one wasn't precise enough about the direction where we were headed. And so you'll notice a couple of key words in this. I know everybody loves to dissect mission statements, but critically important here is that we want to connect Mississippi to the world and also connect the power of art to the power of community. And you'll see that we place kind of equal parts in those in that sentence to Mississippi, the world, art, and community. And that connection piece really is what is driving this project, this exhibition, and most of our work. However, it's also very finely tuned through this commitment. Committed to honesty, equity, and inclusion, the museum's a leader in engaging art, artists, and participants in the critical work of reckoning with the past, connecting with each other in the present, and envisioning a future without division. I think part of that sentence could very well describe the work that is done at the two museums here. So it's another indicator that we are kindred spirits in the work that we're doing, because we want to, with great honesty and inclusion, acknowledge where we've been, but we don't want to stop there. We want to make sure that we trust artists and the community to help us see forward and see what the strength that the past has given us to do that. We particularly like to trust artists to help us do that in community-based settings and with people of community. That's our slice of the pie. And that's why this particular exhibition is taking the shape that it is. You all know a lot of our major programs. We have the Annie Laurie Swaim Hare Memorial Exhibition Series about every other year. You see up here some of the programs, exhibitions that have been funded through the Heron Foundation. This is actually the 17th installation of that series. We also, of course, are committed to Mississippi artists and to Mississippi interpretations by artists of the place where we live. So the Mississippi Invitational happens also on a biannual basis, and then you know of our public programming. In the past few years, we have taken a more intentional step to really addressing issues related to race and equity that emerge in conversation about art, emerge in artistic production and themes, and are relevant to the community in which we live. And so we started the Center for Art and Public Exchange with a grant from the Kellogg Foundation, which really was activating a partnership that we had with Tougaloo College called the Art and Civil Rights Initiative, where we shared collections We exhibited work from each other's collections. We shared a curator. We had paid student interns moving back and forth. CAPE, as we call it, has helped us build a collection of artwork that responds to issues of race and equity, and maybe most significantly, it enables us to bring artists here from around the country who like to work with and in community to activate their own art forms and to amplify what they're trying to communicate through their art practice. And it's also given us the discipline to check in with a community advisory council and a national advisory council on a regular basis so that we can hold ourselves accountable not only to the best standards of what's happening in the country in the art museum business and in socially active art, but also especially to be embedded in and of our community and be accountable to the people who live here. We realized during 2020 that there was a discipline we were engaged in terms of how we look at and think about art in our galleries, how we train what we call our teaching fellows, who are our docents, but they're paid, and they come from the 4 colleges and universities in Jackson. Our teaching fellows used an inquiry-based model of close looking at artworks to let visitors respond to what they think is happening in artwork, and then listen to each other and understand each other's perspectives and each other's backgrounds as they relate to what's happening in an artwork. And so we decided that that was completely relevant as a way of conversation, as a way of talking about race. Particularly after the murder of George Floyd, when people around the country were starting to kind of wake up and realize that this issue is just part of the DNA of our country. It's the part of every person's life who lives in this country, and why not talk about it honestly? Why not listen to each other with grace and compassion? And maybe that's a way, instead of a lot of DEIA workshops, which give you definitions of microaggressions and things like that, which are also important, maybe letting an artist pull things out of each of us is a way to talk about that. So we have created a program that takes that method into the corporate setting and brings teams of people from corporations who are interested in building that kind of community and understanding within their corporate culture to the museum. So this is a 1-minute video that should tell you about that, but maybe that didn't happen. Can you hear that? Well, stay tuned. There's more on, should I hit the computer button? I'll have to get back up after I sit down. What we're hearing from people who have experienced these workshops is that they kind of forget they're in a workshop. They are just in an art museum having conversations and telling each other stories. What happens is they end up learning about each other.
The art and storytelling program, it's hard for me to even call it a diversity and inclusion program. Really, it's about me being able to listen to other people closely. And how that translates back to the workplace is that I think it makes me a better listener and a better viewer of ideas, talent around me. It opens my eyes and ears.
You're not in a lecture style environment. You don't have to have a pen and paper. We're not taking notes. You're not going to pass or fail. Just be fully present, put your phones on mute, and we're going to have a good time.
So if you want more information about that, let us know. Thank you. So, this is what you came to hear about. And so I'm really happy to let you get to know. I mean, our chief curator, Ryan Dennis, moved here in the middle of 2020. And as you know, because many of you are streaming this, we haven't had a lot of these public programs and gatherings. And so this community has not really had the benefit of hearing her brilliance the way those of us who get to work with her every day have. Ryan came to this position, and I hired Ryan because she ran a program in Houston called Project Row Houses, or Project Row House, singular, plural, many houses, which I had followed for years as a project that places artists in community, artists of all disciplines. And she ran the visual art program there. And when I called the person who runs the Center for Curatorial Leadership in New York, she said, "Ryan Dennis is magic." And I was really grateful that Ryan was willing to come with her husband and her baby at that point in the middle of a pandemic to leave all of her family and come here to work with us on what we consider our important work. So she is the co-curator of this exhibition. It's my great privilege to bring Ryan up to tell you all about it. Ryan? Do you need me to hold your hand? Oh, my water. Thank you.
I wonder if your microphone is on. Turned on. Hopefully.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our MDAH partners, and of course, thank you all for being here with us today. I am Ryan Dennis, and as Betsy says, I'm the Chief Curator, Artistic Director of CAPE. I'm really excited to talk to you all today about A Movement in Every Direction, Legacies of the Great Migration. Essentially, this is an opportunity for us to entice you to come and see the exhibition, which is opening next week at the MMA. I should say that this exhibition is, all of our partners are here, but it's an exhibition that has been organized in partnership with the Baltimore Museum of Art. I have a co-curator on this project. Her name is Jessica Bell Brown. And we have been working over the last 2 years to realize a pretty ambitious project for both of our institutions, at the MMA and at the Baltimore Museum of Art. We also have worked with the MDAH to connect artists with the archives and their genealogies and histories to Mississippi, of course, the Mississippi Symphony Orchestra and CAPE, which is part of what Betsy just shared, but specifically our Community Advisory Council. When we started kind of thinking about this exhibition, we wanted to make sure we could engage a kind of hyper-local community, being that this exhibition is, about storytelling. It's about kind of Black histories, African American histories of the South, but also of the nation. And we wanted to really have input from our partners that work or live in communities of color in Jackson. So we're excited because, working from two computers here. The exhibition has a pretty ambitious tour as well. So it is moving from Mississippi. It's going to the Baltimore Museum of Art. It will then travel to the Brooklyn Museum, be on view at the California African American Museum, which is in Los Angeles. And then we are talking to institutions in Chicago and Detroit. Now, this is really important because who doesn't want to be the kind of originating venue and then have an exhibition travel throughout the country? These locations are quite significant because they also mark kind of migratory routes from the Great Migration, which we thought was really, significant as we talk to other museums throughout the country. We also wanted to think really critically about culturally specific institutions to make sure that, this material is getting to BIPOC communities and other communities that, migration has kind of had a deep impact on. So I'm going to ask you all a question. What comes to your mind when you hear the Great Migration? Jacob Lawrence. Others? Moving up. Moving up. Others? The Great Flood. The Great Flood. All relevant. Thank you for engaging. So, the Great Migration is a historic phenomenon that saw, 6 million plus individuals leave the South for cities across the United States. In the early part of the 19th century, the South had 90% African Americans were living here. And by the time it was over in the, late 70s, 47% of African Americans lived in the North and the West. Now, plenty of kind of policies and storms and natural disasters and other things impacted, the reasons for the Great Migration. And the period that we're looking at is between 1915 and 1970, where there were actually two waves that happened. Jessica and I would argue that, the Great Migration is one that is still ongoing. It's an ongoing movement. I think, organizing an exhibition during a pandemic and on the heels of a kind of uprisings and in 2020, one can understand deeply how socioeconomic and cultural shifts make migration necessary, but also partially speculative in its kind of in its movement. So, our exhibition premise. First, artists were given $50,000 to research on a research and travel grant to really track their families' histories and their connections to the Great Migration. This is one of the first few shows that is specifically asking contemporary artists to track their personal stories to the Great Migration. Someone mentioned Jacob Lawrence, and I think most of the time when we think about the Great Migration in a visual culture, one references Jacob Lawrence or, say, Romare Bearden. And this is, I think it's fair to say, one of the first times that a contemporary, is a contemporary artists that are really kind of leading this discussion with us, because it's often talked about within kind of musical and literary traditions. And then I think Jessica and I have really, through conversations with our artists, talked deeply about their families' decisions to stay in the South. And so, when one thinks about the narrative of the Great Migration, they talk about it as, someone left the South and they went north, but there was also a lot of kind of rhythm between, intra-Southern migration, which we're calling this movement between the South. So what might it look like to have, someone leave, say, Humphreys County to come to Jackson? Or what might it look like to have someone leave Louisiana and go to Texas? So that is quite important to kind of recognize in a narrative expansion for this exhibition. So the exhibition includes only new artwork created by 12 African American artists with familial ties to the Deep South. There are 32 plus newly commissioned artworks, and they're all coming from different parts of the country, which you see here. So Isabel Wilkerson is an American journalist and the author of The Warmth of Other Suns, the epic story of America's Great Migration, and her newly published book is called Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. So she says, in this essay she wrote called The Long-Lasting Legacy of the Great Migration, which is represented here in our critical reader I'll talk about later. She says the Great Migration would expose the racial divisions and disparities that in many ways continue to plague the nation and dominate headlines today, from police killings and unarmed African Americans to mass incarceration to widely documented biases in employment, housing, and healthcare education. I would add that the Great Migration would also expose abundance, deep love, importance of land ownership and building free communities, and the ability to see how African Americans amidst trauma can hold space for resilience, transformation, and self-determination. The exhibition is really underscored by what Jessica and I have outlined as 4 movements: refuge, agency, community, and memory and speculation. So I'm going to highlight one artist that will kind of speak to each of these movements. So Carrie Mae Weems is born in 1953. She's from Portland, Oregon, but she has family ties to the South. Her work typically examines issues of race, class, and gender identity, primarily working in photography and video, but also exploring everything from verse to performance. Weems has, regardless of the medium, activism is a really kind of central concern for her practice, specifically looking at history as a way to better understand the present. She is most well known for her kitchen table series, which if you don't know, you should check it out, from the early 1990s, which examined tropes and stereotypes of African American life. So for this exhibition, Carrie Mae has presented two projects that speak to one another. So one is Leave, Leave Now, which is about the disappearance of her grandfather, Frank Weems, who was a member of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union in Arkansas and worked on a plantation. So in 1936, he participated in a cotton strike as a kind of protest of labor concerns and wages, and was met with a kind of with a mob, angry, and was presumed dead. They thought that he was murdered in this incident, and he actually escaped by foot and made it to Chicago. So Carrie has been on this kind of search and understanding of her great-grandfather, Frank Weems, who at the time actually had a lot of prominence. He, when he got to Chicago, he visited a lawyer. So there were these kind of like clippings that would come out about her family or about her grandfather, but it was just, he disappeared. It's like Frank Weems happened and then he went missing. And so this kind of project for her is, has everything, I think, to do with, the economy of cotton culture following the Civil War. It has, it's a kind of Civil War that resulted. It has everything to do about the Great Depression and FSA and the New Deal. And, she's exploring all of these kind of themes within A Pepper's Ghost, which is, beep, nope. Well, it's to the left, to the left there. So A Pepper's Ghost is an illusion technique from the early 19th century, used in theater and cinema in various concerts. So it's basically like a big kind of hologram. and I can't give it all away because you have to come and see it. But she is using primary source material and interviews with her parents and other family members about her grandfather, and will create this kind of presentation that allows us to better understand the story that she understands about her grandfather. And then she's also presenting a kind of these 7 digital prints of constellations. So for her, Frank Weems is her North Star, but it is also said that Frank Weems, made it to Chicago by following the North Star. And so it is a kind of ode to her grandfather, and an exploration for her family. So Mark Bradford is another artist in the exhibition. He's born 1961. He is born in Los Angeles and still lives in Los Angeles. He has a wide-ranging kind of conceptual practice and is best known for his multimedia abstract paintings and collages with scavenged materials and weathered and incised surfaces that often reveal the atrocities and struggles of race and poverty. For this show, he really took inspiration from a 1913 advertisement, which is here. This pointer's not working, so I'm going to move around a little bit. So the ad came from The Crisis, which is a publication from the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, to attract people to come to Blackdom, New Mexico. So Blackdom, New Mexico was founded in 1898 by a homesteader who was fleeing threats from the KKK and became the state's first community of African Americans. Its population rose to about 300 within a 5-year period and was really a thriving place in New Mexico for a number of years. So Mark has created these kind of, these panels that have been oxidized, bleached, and caulked. And the text kind of reads, "Wanted, 500 Negro families, farmers preferred, to settle on free government lands in Chavez County, New Mexico. Blackdom is a Negro colony, fertile soil, ideal climate, no Jim Crow laws." So Mark's connection to the Great Migration is one that I think many maybe African Americans have, which is, not having a deep understanding of both sides of their family's history. So he is more connected with his maternal family line and knows that his family, have come from the South, but went to Philadelphia and then moved to Los Angeles. But he often talks about the kind of spirit of the Great Migration and migrants specifically around how one would need to kind of create a way out of no way, or leave a kind of space and create a kind of a place like Blackdom to thrive and create anew. So he really connects his research and his understanding of his family's history with Blackdom, because he thinks of them as a kind of a group of entrepreneurs that really had maybe little means, but also ideas to shape an environment that they wanted to really thrive in. Robert Pruett, another artist in the show, is born 1975 and from Houston. He is known for his drawings, videos, and installations examining the historical and contemporary experiences of African Americans and the Black body and identity. Utilizing references to hip hop, science and science fiction, technology, comic books, Black political struggles, and traditional cultures, he creates a series of fictional portraits with an ambiguous but shared narrative that suggests a radical Black past, present, and future. So For this show, Robert created A Song for Travelers. This is the largest work, the second largest work to date. The first on this scale is in South Africa, so it's actually never been shown in the United States. So we're thinking about this one as the first. So he has created and did a lot of research about his family who are from Louisiana and Texas, specifically in Houston, in a hyperlocal community that was formed by Black folks in the early part of the 19th century called Fourth Ward, is where his family is from. And he thinks about and talks about how Fourth Ward and even parts of Third Ward, which is where his family shared space, were protective sites, meaning all of the kind of resources that folks needed were just there in this community, very similarly to a place like Blackdom. So he's worked with his family to kind of source photos and other material to better understand, the connections to this history, both specifically in Houston, but then broadly. So he found this portrait of a family photo up to the left at a family reunion. I think this photo is taken in the 70s. But I think for him, what resonated was, this kind of group of women surrounding this elder, and Robert he's like a futurist in his head, so he's very imaginative, and so he's always kind of like pulling from these visual language and putting them into the drawing. So you can see, these kind of in progress shots, that rendering, say at the bottom, which is informed by the top image, that then turns to make this. So A Song for Travelers is kind of this like phantasmagoric, drawing that collapses time and opens us up to really understand Houston's history, but also, I think other locations where, migrants traveled throughout the country. It has a kind of really beautiful spirit figure here, which all of these figures are in hand. They have gifts to present to this spirit figure, this kind of migrant that's about to journey on to their next location to show us a kind of experience of a past, but also futuring. It also looks at, the influence of the church and religion and spirituality. It talks to us about education from the representation and formation of Texas Southern, which is a HBCU. And then, not pleasant moments, like the kind of riots that took place throughout Houston. So we're really excited about, Robert's work, and it really kind of confronts you as soon as you walk into the exhibition, and connects to the kind of social networks that were built from the Great Migration. The last artist that I'm going to talk about is Theaster Gates Jr. So Theaster Gates Jr. lives and works in Chicago. He creates work that engage with space theory and land development, sculpture and performance. Drawing on his background in urban planning and preservation, Gates really redeems spaces left behind. His work contends with the notions of Black space as a formal exercise defined by collective desire, artistic agency, and the tactics of kind of pragmatists. In 2010, he created the Rebuild Foundation, a nonprofit platform for art, cultural development, and neighborhood transformation on the south side of Chicago. So for our show, he has created the double wide, which really kind of reflects on his time in Humphreys County as a child. So both of his parents All of his family is from Mississippi. So he really kind of recalls this space as central for his upbringing, but now also as he navigates as an artist. So most people know Theaster from these like new developments in Chicago on the South Side, but when you talk to him and really understand where his family is from, this farm, they have land, they understand the importance of land and the value of it, you begin to understand why Theaster kind of moves in the ways that he does in Chicago, which is directly connected to, his time seeing elders in his family own land and making decisions to stay in the South and not leave during, not travel north, essentially. So he really makes a kind of deep connection and distinct connection to land ownership and living off the land, which is kind of critical for self-determined future of Black folks. The double wide is really a kind of amalgamate of the migration experience. So you will be met with sound and light, pickled goods from a locally sourced company, and it really gives you a kind of sensorium of the South. And we're really excited by the presentation that Theaster and others have shared with us. I'm plugging this again. So this ambitious project is ambitious from the exhibition to our education and interpretation initiatives and to our publications. And so we have created 3 volumes of books. This is volume 1, which is a critical reader. And it really breaks down primary research and scholarship, really contextualizing the Great Migration from 1870 to 1970. Jessica Bell Brown and I worked over the last, few years with a great team to pull a lot of information that represents Mississippi and other southern cities and states to, other cities like Chicago and Baltimore, et cetera. And we're also working on now Volume 2, which is the exhibition catalog that you all will have access to at the end of the summer, which we're really excited by. Essays by Jessica and I, and also newly commissioned text by Kiase Lehman, who is from Jackson, Mississippi, Sharifa Rhodes Pitts, from Houston, but lives in upstate New York. Jessica Lynn, who is a writer, and she's from Virginia, currently living in New York, and then Dr. Willie Wright, who is also from Houston and is a nomadic professor, so I can't tell you where he's based right now. I'm going to call Betsy back up to just share a little bit about our storytelling portal, and I think we're on limited time.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I'll be really quick. Obviously, if you think through what Ryan has talked about with these artists, and you, as I know you have memorized our mission statement, this word connect keeps coming to mind for me, because there's so many connections between here and there and now and then and tomorrow. And we're trying to bring all of those themes to life in our public programming. Everywhere I go, and I see an African-American artist, or I talk to one, I say, "What's your migration story?" And it's right there. And artists aren't operating in a vacuum. They're just like every other person in the country. And so we wanted a way to connect this exhibition to regular folks' migration stories. Our education team has put together a digital storytelling portal that will be unveiled here, where, not unlike you can do in the 2 museums, you can enter a space and with your family, up to 4 people, and tell your story. One of the interesting pieces to this is that we're not going to own the stories at the end of this journey. The stories and the pod that the storytelling happens in are going to travel to Baltimore, Brooklyn, LA, and Detroit. And you'll be able to see excerpts of people's stories. They'll be geotagged, so you can make connections if you want to. But at the end of that tour, the storyteller gets an email with a digital file, and the storyteller owns the story. I think that's really something that we have found in listening to people to be really important, that that there's this kind of personal agency with their own story, and they're not turning it over to this institution somewhere else. But it's being activated to connect with people across the country. Elizabeth Callahan is here. If you want to talk to her about that afterwards, she actually knows what geotag means and can talk to you about that. Opening weekend is next weekend. We'll have free admission all weekend. We'll have a symposium. Katie's going to be part of that, as is Sadia Hartman, who wrote Beautiful Lives, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, which is an amazing book. The artists will all be here except for two. Theaster Gates has a musical group it used to be called the Black Months of Mississippi. Now it's just Theaster Gates and the Black Months. They'll perform on Friday night. And on Saturday night, the Mississippi Symphony Orchestra will be having its main stage concert, which will include a production of a symphony by Florence Price, an African-American composer who migrated from Arkansas to Chicago. One of our great partnerships with Archives and History is a National Teachers Institute that will happen in July, bringing educators from across the country to co-create curricula for the classroom. And then another partnership with Archives and History is our closing week. We will both present to you Isabel Wilkerson, the author of The Warmth of Other Suns, and Jason Moran and Alicia Hall Moran will reprise a version of their performance, Two Wings, about musical journeys through the Great Migration that premiered at Carnegie Hall and the Kennedy Center. That's it for me. We are thrilled to be presenting this, and we have 7 minutes for questions.
Yes. Betsy, I'm curious how y'all selected the artist.
Well, Ryan did it, so I will let her talk to it. While she's getting her mic turned on, I will say that, first and foremost, it was about that family tie to the South. And also, we were interested in artists who were open to the idea of including research and examinations of primary materials in their process.
Yeah. I think Jessica and I both have a kind of a dream artist list that, as curators, is just an ongoing list of folks that you want to work with. And we came together and, reviewed those lists and had a lot of studio visits and conversations to understand people's connections to the South. It was a pretty open-ended question, and how they answered allowed us to kind of think through what their answers would shape and form to an exhibition. So it was just conversation and studio visits and going through that process. Very organic, I have to say.
How many of the artists are actually Mississippi connected?
Let's see. Carrie Mae, Jamia, Akia, about half, actually. And then others are, from, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, very southern.
Part of that 50 grand was to go to them trying to find their genealogy, is that right?
It was to buy them time and travel and thinking space, yes, to either go to a physical archive or or to a collection or family land.
Yeah.
Some of the artists travel to these places to do filming. But for artists, it's largely about time. It's about buying them space where they don't have to create something that's going to sell in 3 weeks. Is that fair?
Yeah.
I have a silly question.
Hang on, I'll bring the microphone and
For this event?
Is what going to be open?
The restaurant.
Will your restaurant be reopened for this event?
We're actually working on.
We're working on that.
We're working on that. So
2 weeks ago, I would have said yes, and now I'm saying we're working on it. You know, Katie
But
stole
hopefully
our
the exhibition
chef.
will draw you in. The show will draw you in, and then food will just be an accompaniment.
other questions?
Well, we hope you'll come see us and come to the programs. And again, thanks to Archives and History for everything you've done as our partner and are continuing to do.
Thank you, Brian and Betsy, for that wonderful and thought-provoking and tantalizing presentation. I hope you will all join us next week for History is Lunch, when Alicia K. Jackson will discuss her new University Press of Mississippi book, The Recovered Life of Isaac Anderson. And I will see all of you at the Mississippi Museum of Art next weekend. Thank you.